All right. This is Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. Uh, it's warm, and I'm sure we're all aware of how warm it can be, even in May. And sometimes we experience it real quickly as soon as we walk outside, and sometimes it just kind of sneaks up on us and then it slaps us in the face, so to speak. But it is warm. Um, just a couple of things that are coming up. I guess the primary thing coming up is we have high school graduations day after tomorrow, and the day after that, Friday and Saturday. Brazoswood graduates on Friday, I believe, and that's of course our own Christine is graduating, so we're looking forward to celebrating with her. And then of course on Saturday night is Brazosport's graduation, and I don't think we have any of our own from church graduating, but there are a number of kids we've known through sports and so forth at Brazosport High School, including Michael, who is a member at St. Joseph Baptist Church. So he's almost one of our kids, and so that's big events. And then also coming up is Vacation Bible School late in June. I believe it starts. Let me get my cheat sheet here, also known as my Far Side calendar. June 25th is when that begins. So, and it seems like a long way away, but it's not. Hello, Larry. And just a couple things also. Keep remembering some of our folks in prayer. Remember the Joyce and her family and the loss of her brother Benny, and then JP, who is Jerry and Vicky's neighbor, passed away, and remember his wife. I think her name is Cheryl, but she's also dealing with cancer. So please remember her as well. Let's see. Also, Charlie Lackey's grandson Joseph is in the Air Force Reserve, and he is currently on on a deployment in Jordan. So remember him. Also, another thing I just want to mention. Monday is Memorial Day, and as I was looking at the back of the bulletin where I see military personnel, reminded about Joseph, of course, but also Memorial Day is about pausing and remembering those who sacrificed their lives for us in the field of battle, and so we want to remember them. With that in mind, I am sure that there are various Memorial Day services throughout our county. I do know the American Legion in Brazoria is hosting a service at the Heritage Building there in Brazoria at 10 o'clock Monday. And that building is the old school, the old elementary school there, right off of the main street as you come into Brazoria. And nothing against anybody else. I happen to know about that one. And so, all right. Tonight we're going to be in Acts 25, and I really struggled about separating this from chapter 26 because they're certainly tied together, but just because that's a lot, and so in the interest of time, I suppose we're just going to look at chapter 25 tonight. And if your Bible is like mine, there's a heading right over chapter 25 that says appeal to Caesar. Last time chapter 24 ended with verse 27, where it says, after 2 years had passed, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and because Felix wanted to do the Jews a favor, he left Paul in prison. So Festus has been the governor, and he's left Paul in prison for about 2 years, and now the new guy's on the scene, and his name is Festus. Beginning now in verse 20, in chapter 25, verse 1. 3 days after Festus arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. The chief priests and the leaders of the Jews presented their case against Paul to him, and they appealed, asking for a favor against Paul that Festus summon him to Jerusalem. They were, in fact, preparing an ambush along the road to kill him. Festus, however, answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, that he himself was about to go there shortly. Therefore, he said, let those of you who have authority go down with me and accuse him if he has done anything wrong. When he had spent not more than 8 or 10 days among them, he went down to Caesarea. The next day, seated at the tribunal, he commanded Paul to be brought in. When he arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him and brought many serious charges that they were not able to prove. Then Paul made his defense. Neither against the Jewish law, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I sinned in any way. But Festus, wanting to do the Jews a favor, replied to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem to be tried before me there on these charges? Paul replied, I am standing at Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as even you yourself know very well. If then I did anything wrong and am deserving of death, I'm not trying to escape death. But if there's nothing to what these men accuse me of, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then after Festus conferred with his council, he replied, you have appealed to Caesar you will go. And this next section kind of sets the stage for the next chapter. Several days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived in Caesarea and paid a courtesy call on Festus. Since they were staying there several days, Festus presented Paul's case to the king, saying, there's a man who is left as a prisoner by Felix. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews presented their case and asked that he be condemned. I answered them that if it is not the Roman custom to give someone up before the accused faces the accusers and has an opportunity for defense against the charges. So when they had assembled here, I did not delay. The next day I took my seat at the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought in. The accusers stood up, but brought no charge against him of the evils I was expecting. Instead, they had some disagreements with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus, a dead man Paul claimed to be alive. Since I was at a loss in a dispute over such things, I asked him if he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding these matters. But when Paul appealed to be held for trial by the emperor, I ordered him to be kept in custody until I could send him to Caesar. Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow you will hear him, he replied. So the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the auditorium with the military commanders and prominent men of the city. When Festus gave the command, Paul was brought in. Then Festus said, King Agrippa and all men present with us, you see this man. The whole Jewish community has appealed to me concerning him, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he should not live any longer. I found that he had not done anything deserving of death, but when he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to send him. I have nothing definite to write to my lord about him. Therefore I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after this examination is over, I may have something to write. For it seems unreasonable to me to send a prisoner without indicating the charges against him. Okay. Talking about Festus just a little bit. We don't know a whole lot about him. Excuse me. Apparently he had a Roman upbringing, was thoroughly Greek in his culture. He served about 2 years in this position as governor here, and he died while he was in office. Generally, everything about him is kind of favorable in general, but it's really too brief a time to know for sure. However, he does seem willing to sacrifice Paul just so he can make a good impression on the Jews. And it's possible that he too wanted a bribe. And of course, that wouldn't be too good a trait from our point of view. But we notice that almost immediately, almost as soon as he takes office, he visits Jerusalem. Because of the relationship between Judea, the Jews, and Rome, an early visit to Jerusalem seems like a wise move on his part, to kind of make a good impression on them and try to placate them, because there was a lot of tension there. And while he's there, the Jewish leaders ask him to bring Paul to Jerusalem for a trial. And we also see that they had no intention of Paul ever making it to Jerusalem for a trial. Instead, they were preparing an ambush to have him killed on the way. But instead of agreeing to their plan to bring him down up to Jerusalem, he says that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and they themselves should go to Caesarea, and he will hear the case himself. And he says that he'll be returning there shortly, and it really is a pretty brief time before he's back there. It says not more than 8 or 10 days, so I'm going to call it 9. So went back to Caesarea, and as soon as he arrives there, the hearing is convened, and once again the non-provable charges are brought against Paul. One of the things we see is there really are some hidden agendas in play here. One is, again, that the Jews wanted to, by any means possible, wanted Paul dead. They were prepared to ambush him on the way. And Festus also, his agenda is more about keeping the Jews happy. That might make things a little more peaceful in the area. So Paul's defense, in brief, was that he had done nothing against the laws of the Jews. He hadn't desecrated the temple. He hadn't been guilty of sedition against Rome. Basically, all the nebulous kinds of things they were saying about Paul were completely unfounded. And so Festus is unsure of what to do, so he asks, well, are you willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial before these men? Of course, Paul did not fall off the turnip truck yesterday. He knew before they wanted to kill him, so he's still aware of their plans. And he knew there would be no fair trial in Jerusalem, even if he made it there. And it's true that Festus himself would be the judge, but there were certainly some factors that would make it unlikely that a fair trial would take place. Of course, the Sanhedrin themselves would be in they were hostile. They'd be kind of running the show. There would probably be very few, if any, friendly witnesses for Paul. In addition, the governor would likely have an advisory council made up of people who are experts in religion. And this advisory council would be made up of those Jewish people who were accusing Paul. So it's not likely he's going to get an impartial word of advice here and there. Before we really mention this appeal that Paul makes to Caesar, just want to mention a couple of things. He makes it clear that he's not afraid of dying if he's guilty of a crime worthy of death. But he recognized the accusation itself as false, and understood that going to Jerusalem was the same thing as turning him over to the Jews, who had only one goal, and that was to kill him. As a Roman citizen, he recognized that his only recourse was to appeal to the emperor, a basic right of a Roman citizen. So basically, Paul summarizes everything we've just said. He says, I appeal to Caesar. And Festus announces on the basis of that appeal, he's got to go to the emperor. Okay, you've appealed to Caesar you'll go. Then we get some visitors on the scene. King Agrippa and Bernice arrive for a visit, probably an official visit. They're from a neighboring area, and so they're coming to pay their respects to the new governor. And by the way, when we have these people who are called governors and people who are called kings, remember they're all serving at the permission and appointment of the Roman government. So it's not so much that the king is over the governor. They're just in equivalent positions in different areas, so to speak. But let's just talk for just a minute who Agrippa is. He's also known as Herod Agrippa II. With a name like that, it's pretty easy to ascertain that he is, in fact, a descendant of Herod the Great. In fact, he is the great-grandson of Herod the Great. His own father was Herod Agrippa I. And ethnically, they are Idumeans, or the Old Testament name is Edomites. But they, as a family thing, and probably as a nod to the Jewish people, after all, Herod was king over the Jewish territory originally, and he was the first of the Herods. So it was a prudent thing to take on Judaism. But this Agrippa, not only this particular Agrippa, as well as some of the others, had embraced Judaism a little bit more. Whether he kept all the law, he was certainly familiar with the law. They often did whatever they could to advance Judaism, at least in part to kind of maintain the peace. And sometimes they would do that to the detriment of the early Christians. Herod the Great had been ruling over most of the former territory of Israel, and when he died, the territory was split up among some of his sons. And by the way, quite a few of his children had already been executed previously because he viewed them as a threat to his own rule. But no one received the former territory. However, Herod Agrippa I, by around 40 AD, had begun to rule over most of the territory that had been under Herod the Great. And he sought the favor of the Jews, and he's the Herod who sought favor by mistreating the Jews. He had James the apostle executed. He had Peter in prison. We read about that back in chapter 12. And when he died, just about 4 years later, his own son was deemed too young, and so Galilee and Judea reverted to governors, Festus, Felix, etc. And around 53 A.D., this Herod Agrippa II, from now on known as Agrippa, he became the king of the area to the north and east of Galilee. He never ruled over Jewish territories, but he was considered somewhat of an expert in Jewish matters. He was even granted supervision over Jewish ceremonies, and even was in a position to appoint the high priest. So he did have a lot of influence, even though he had no territorial jurisdiction over Jewish areas. He was kind of the king of the Jews, so to speak. A couple of other things about him, about his family. Drusilla, the wife of Felix, the previous governor, was Agrippa's sister. And when we read about Agrippa and Bernice arriving, we might assume that Bernice is his wife. However, Bernice is also his sister. There was a great deal of conjecture in their lifetime that they were actually living an incestuous relationship. That's not necessarily known for sure, but everything I've read seems to indicate that it was generally assumed to be true. As we move up towards the hearing before Agrippa, one thing we need to note is that the hearing will not necessarily do anything to determine Paul's fate. Instead, it was to clarify some issues. The governor has no clue. Festus has no idea about what's going on with this, with these Jewish laws, and so he wants to consult the expert Agrippa, and so he can help him to determine what charges should I tell the emperor he's charged with. He was concerned about Judaism in general, but then he was really confused about this idea of this Jesus, a dead man, Paul claims to be alive. Of course, we know he was not a dead man. He had been dead, but he was alive, and he is alive. And then from Agrippa's standpoint, he would probably gain some favor with Festus. Never a bad thing for the governor of a neighboring territory to owe you a favor. And then as we read some things in the latter part of this chapter, like in verse 23, it also seems that Agrippa and Bernice will have an opportunity to impress all the assembled people with their finery. And the reason I say that is because it says that Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp. And as I read that, I just think about so many movies set back in ancient times where there's great ceremony with all the dignitaries marching in. And of course, in the movies, there's always this imperial kind of music playing as they march in, and each dignitary kind of wants to outdo the previous one or the next one with their finery. And of course, nobody would dare outdo Agrippa and Bernice, and they march in with their, I don't know, all their finery, and then uh, the military commanders and the important men of the city all march in. So it's this large gathering, a public gathering of the most important people in Caesarea, plus Agrippa, Bernice, and their entourage, because they had to have an entourage, probably some of the military men of their own. Um, so basically, anybody who is somebody is there. And then Festus makes this formal, I suppose, presentation and about the great uproar that this man has caused. And so now, you, Agrippa, I am so pleased to have you here so you can give us this information and we can make a determination about what needs to happen. And he does say that I found nothing in this man that deserves death, but he's made an appeal to Caesar, so I just need to know what to tell Caesar when I send him. And that's he ends it up by saying, it seems unreasonable to me to send a prisoner without indicating the charges against him. Here's a guy in jail. I don't know why he's in jail, but he appealed to you, so here he is. So I can understand his dilemma. One of the things that's about to happen is that a portion of what the Lord had told Paul he would do is about to be fulfilled. He is about to proclaim Christ before kings. He's already proclaimed Christ before governors and other officials and dignitaries, even the Sanhedrin, and now he's about to proclaim before a king. And do you think it was just Festus wanted to be just that precluded him from sending Paul to Jerusalem? He might have had some logical reasons in his head for doing that, but at the same time, ultimately it was the hand of God at work, because God had determined that he would speak before kings, and now he's about to. So it's just a reminder that man cannot derail God's plan. Often we may put ourselves in a position as to miss the blessing of being in on the plan, but his plan will go forward. And his plan is going to continue to go forward. I'm going to have more to say next week as we go into chapter 26. But I just want to ask again about any prayer updates or names to add. Again, please remember JP's family. Also continue to remember Joyce and the rest of her family and the loss of her brother Benny. And then there are others in hospitals,